I hope that Mr. Hoyer will be rejoining us very soon as he continues to mend. Next week, the House will meet on Monday at 12 p.m. for a morning hour debate and at 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes expected no later than 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for a morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. And on Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. Pro forma session. I'm sorry, at 11:30 for pro forma session. Now on Monday, we will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business today. In addition, we will consider H.R. 3005, legislation to remove the bust of former Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney, Confederate statutes, and certain other statutes. H.R. 2662, the Inspectors General Independence and Empowerment Act. This legislation is sorely needed in the wake of the prior administration's assault on the rule of law and independent oversight. It would strengthen the independence of inspectors general and protect their ability to investigate abuses at federal agencies. A resolution to establish a select committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol. H.R. 3684 will be considered, the Invest in America Act, to grow our economy and create good jobs by modernizing our nation's roads, bridges, rail, and transit. In addition to addressing surface transportation, this bill will also include critical provisions to address our safe drinking water and wastewater infrastructure needs. With that, I'll yield back to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. And as we look at some of the bills that are going to be coming to the floor next week, I know there's been a lot of talk about infrastructure. As we saw over these past few days, there's a bipartisan bill that's being worked through mostly in the Senate, where a number of Republicans and Democrats had seemed to reach an agreement on what would be considered traditional infrastructure without tax increases. It's now become a little more confused by this suggestion that maybe the Speaker has said it has to be tied to a budget reconciliation bill that would possibly raise taxes, which is not surely where we are. It doesn't seem to be where the bipartisan group in the Senate is. I would ask the gentleman, is there any expectation, because we don't have a budget that's moved through the House, and a budget would have to move first to create an ability for a budget reconciliation bill to move through the House or the Senate, if that even happened. Is there an expectation there would be a budget resolution coming to the floor in the upcoming weeks? And I would yield.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. I have not consulted with the majority leader on that subject. I suspect that we will await for the Senate's actions and make determinations as needed when we get some definition as to what they're going to do. I understand that the gentleman indicates that what has occurred regarding the bipartisan legislation is of concern, but I assure the gentleman that the President made it very clear from the beginning that he has a definition of infrastructure that goes into family needs and or more or less non-traditional. And I think that all that the Speaker has been talking about is to reinforce her beliefs, that the president is correct in his thoughts.
And gentlemen,
Are you back?
For over decades, we've never really had a disagreement on what infrastructure means, and I think most Americans would recognize with the definition that we've always gone by on a bipartisan basis, and it's roads and bridges and waterways, ports. I think recently both sides would agree that broadband is something that we would include in that definition, but that is what always was the traditional definition of infrastructure by both parties. It seems like on the majority side, they're trying to change that definition to include a lot of extraneous things, which were not part of the Senate bipartisan agreement. But the other new addition seems to be this idea that a shell reconciliation bill to raise taxes would now be something that would maybe hold hostage the rest of the bipartisan agreement. I hope that's not the road we go down, especially considering there does seem to be a lot of bipartisan movement on something that we would all agree is traditional infrastructure. And so I know the bill next week that's being brought to the House floor does not meet that bipartisan test of what senators and others that are trying to work together have reached agreement on. So hopefully this doesn't get bogged down in a fight on things that are not considered infrastructure, but I don't know if the gentleman has anything to add to it. I would hope we go down the road where both parties could come to an agreement and we could actually get something done, and I would yield.
Thank you for yielding. I don't know that I have any more to add to that except to say that if we go back into history, we've got to know that rail was not infrastructure until Abraham Lincoln decided that it should be. The interstate highways were not infrastructure until Dwight Eisenhower decided that it should be. And broadband has not been infrastructure until now. And I think that's because we are being more futuristic when we think about what the needs are going to be in this great country as we move forward. And so I'm glad that the gentleman agrees that broadband is in fact an infrastructure issue. A couple of years ago, I had a hard time getting people to understand that. But COVID-19 has revealed to us that there are things that we did not consider in the past, which we must consider going forward. Broadband is one of them. Family infrastructure needs or a few other things. And I'll yield back.
I appreciate that, and I hope as we look toward something that we could all agree on, that's the road we stay on, so to speak, as we talk about infrastructure, not extraneous things that we don't agree on. And clearly, we've looked at and agreed on things like broadband, and we've seen the FCC take good steps to continue to expand broadband, especially in rural areas where there is a true digital divide that we're trying to overcome. And I know Congress has come together many times in the last few years to try to put more money in place to bridge that gap on the digital divide. Still more work to do, and especially during the pandemic we saw there are more needs. But if we can keep it focused on those things, I think you'll see a lot of bipartisan agreement. Once it gets beyond that, that's where things have seemed to break down. What I want to ask about something that's going to expire at the end of next week, and that is this proxy voting scheme that's been going on since May of last year. And from what the majority had presented when this got created was the reason that proxy voting was there is because we had a pandemic and things were shut down and people had trouble getting around and maybe were concerned about the virus and not wanting to leave maybe their home or their local community. Obviously now with a vaccine readily available for any American who wants to take it, with more states opening up, and you're seeing even here in Congress, many committees that were not having in-person hearings are now getting back to in-person hearings. So what I would ask the gentleman is when proxy voting expires on July 3rd, can we let Congress get back to the normal work and not renew proxy voting? Because as we've seen, there's a lot more cooperation, a lot more agreements you can reach when you're here in person working together that you just can't get on a Zoom or WebEx call, or just somebody staying at home, proxy voting, and not coming here to Washington when now everyone who wants to can come. And we've looked at what this has done. It's hurt the institution in our opinion. But there are 6 Democrats who, since this got started last year, have never come to vote in person except for the vote for Speaker of the House, because that is a vote that you cannot cast by proxy. And so if they were able to get here for the vote for Speaker in January, yet on every other vote have not cast a single vote in person, then they're clear it's not because they have no ability to get to Washington. And it feels like there's an abuse of this proxy voting that's shown it needs to end. And I don't know if there's an expectation next week that the majority would renew this. We would urge strongly that we let it expire on July 3rd and then get back to the work that we do in person. And I would yield to the gentleman.
Thank you for yielding. I assure the gentleman that his concerns are well considered on this side of the aisle. Next week will be our last week before going into the Independence Day break, and I suspect some assessments will be made between now and our returning after the July 4th holidays. As you know, we've gone from 45 minutes down to 20 minutes now. I'm looking forward to us going to the regular 15 minutes now that people are gathering on the floor. And I would hope that between now and then, families, we want to be a family-friendly Congress, and families are reordering their businesses so that their children and other children can be accounted and taken care of as we return back to normal. Because these considerations are not just for us, but it's for what's happening back in communities and whether or not these communities are being stood up in such a way that child care can be available and other things that will keep families intact. But I assure you that we are concerned about getting back to regular order, and I look for that to occur hopefully soon after the July 4th holidays. Are you back?
I appreciate that, and hopefully we just let it expire. Clearly that's our hope, and we urge the majority to consider that, because if you look at voting, it is good that we're finally limiting the time so we can have a normal voting schedule, or at least get closer to that. But as we look at the appropriations process, for example, where appropriations bills will start moving out of committee in July, may start coming to the floor in July. As we know, if we have a robust, open process for appropriations bills, typically you might have 100 amendments on a given appropriations bill. And so many times we have late night votes. We have 2-minute votes, because if Congress is truly going to process those amendments in an orderly way, even 15-minute votes or 5-minute votes haven't worked. And so we went to a 2-minute voting schedule. You can't do that if we have proxy voting, because as the gentleman knows, it does eat up a lot more time and delays our ability to move through a normal appropriations process. So looking towards that, the July 3rd date is there. If it expires, as we hope it does, I think that would help Congress to more effectively work through some of the big bills that we have on our calendar ahead. So I know y'all will be considering that. I think the gentleman knows where we are and what we would hope happens. Do want to ask about some of the crises that we're seeing around the country. You look at inflation continuing to be a growing problem. We had in our committee, the Federal Reserve Chairman, Mr. Powell, just a few days ago talked about the concerns with 5% inflation. We continue to see, whether it's gasoline prices, double-digit increases, everything we buy at the grocery, you're starting to see larger increases in costs for grocery items, housing, if you're just trying to buy a house, to renovate your house, those costs are higher. If you want an appliance, you might have to wait 6 months. Much of that is because of the labor shortage. Every small business you talk to says the biggest impediment they have to getting their businesses back up again is that the federal government is paying people more money not to work than to go back to work. When you have millions of job openings, it doesn't seem to make sense that we're allowing people to be paid not to work when businesses are struggling to get back on their feet from this pandemic. So I don't know if there's an anticipation to bring legislation to start confronting some of those problems. Clearly, we see the Vice President at the border today while she's not at the areas of the border where you see the biggest increases in illegal crossings, we know that there is a crisis in the United States. And it's not just people in South and Central America coming across. We're seeing people from Middle Eastern countries. There have been people on the terrorist watch list that are coming. I hope that as she comes back from that trip, hopefully she's met with Border Patrol agents, people that have told us what the problems are. The president could address all of this today by reversing some of his executive actions that have opened the border. But if he doesn't, I hope Congress would look at bringing legislation to confront a lot of those challenges that I talked about. And I'm not sure if y'all anticipate bringing bills like that, but would ask the gentleman if he had any comment on that. I would be happy to yield.
Well, thank you for yielding the time. As you mentioned, we were honored this week with the presence of Chairman Powell at our Select Subcommittee hearing. Now, Chairman Powell made two things very clear to us. Number one, he says, it would be a big mistake to put the brakes on too soon, that we must allow families to get back on their feet, communities to get restored, and he advised against us doing anything too soon. He also made it very clear that if he were to, and the Fed were to make some determination that inflation was becoming a problem. You may recall he indicated that a lot of the price increases have come about as a result of bottlenecks that exist in the system as people are gearing back up. And he thinks that it's going to be temporary. He also feels that if it looks like it's going to go beyond being temporary, that he has the tools to make the kind of adjustments that are necessary to keep the economy flowing and to keep inflation in check. So I think that on my side of the aisle, we are very comfortable following the advice of Chairman Powell, and I would hope that this is an issue that will not get politicized. We need to get this country back on track. We need to get families back in touch with each other. We need to keep this country moving in a positive way. So I think we're going to wait and take advice from Chairman Powell on whether we should do anything legislatively to deal with that issue. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and as we know, the Federal Reserve Chairman has some tools available to him, if need be, to address problems in the economy that we're starting to see, but we also know that those tools are very harsh. Hopefully those tools would be a last resort, and so it's important for us as policymakers to not just sit back and wait for problems to occur that then the Federal Reserve Chairman has to address, because we haven't, because we know if he does those things, whether it's limiting money supply, interest rate increases, those are all things that would hurt hardworking families all across the country. And so as he even recognized, right now the enhanced unemployment benefits that are by all accounts the reason that we're having a worker shortage, the reason that every small business is having trouble getting more people back to work so they can meet that supply demand that's starting to create inflation. He did acknowledge that when those enhanced benefits run out, then you'll see the worker shortage get better and improve and people start going back to work. We could end those earlier, acknowledging there are millions of job openings. We shouldn't be paying people money to not work when there are jobs that are available right now and they can't find takers. What we've seen is a majority of states now have said we're going to end those benefits on our own so that people can get back to work, so that we can get our economies moving. Many large states, Florida, Texas, next week, Tennessee, I think, many other states, by the end of next week will do that. I'm proud that my state, yesterday, our governor, who's a Democrat, signed a bill working with Republicans to end our enhanced unemployment benefits in Louisiana by the end of July. He acknowledged, as a Democrat, that you can work together, and this is a problem, and let's address this problem. While states are addressing it, some are not, many have, but hopefully Congress can look at ways where we can address some of these problems earlier so that it doesn't fall in the lap of the Federal Reserve Chairman, and then he has to take harsh steps to deal with the problems that we should be fixing as we see them coming. If the gentleman has anything else, that's all I have.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. I assure you that in my instance, my governor is a Republican. In fact, he was the first governor to endorse the previous president. But we are very close friends, and we have been in consultation over what to do as we go forward. I am working very closely with him and working very closely with other governors as well. And I think that each state is unique when it comes to how to stand back up as we go forward. I am proud that Louisiana is moving in the right direction. I applaud John Bell Edwards for working closely with you. I assure you that I'm working just as close with the governor of South Carolina and other governors to make sure that we do what is necessary to apply our efforts in such a way that it won't cause problems for states as they stand back up. Are you back?
I appreciate that because, you know, as I work well with our governor, we might not see eye to eye on everything, but Governor John Bell Edwards is, I think, addressing those problems adequately. He worked with the Republican legislature, and they got an agreement, and it was a good agreement. I know you have a good relationship with your governor. You and I have a good relationship, and hopefully we can use those good relationships to prove people wrong who look at Congress and say, why can't they get agreements on things? We're seeing some positive movement on the Senate side. Haven't seen the details, and the details are very, very important. But hopefully on these big issues, we can work together and build those relationships so that we can actually solve these problems and solve them in a way that it doesn't harm families where it could end up in a harsh place if we don't confront those problems. So I know we'll be talking more about that in the future.
Sure.
If the gentleman is not the one doing the colloquy in the future, we hope the majority leader is back. I've enjoyed this with you. We obviously enjoy our relationship on many fronts, but it's been a pleasure to work with you on the colloquy. Hopefully the majority leader's here next time, and he's got big shoes to fill. But I would yield back to the gentleman.
Well, thank you so much for yielding, and thank you so much for your friendship, and thanks so much for being so kind with your remarks today. But I am looking forward to the majority leader coming back and taking his rightful place at this mic, and you and I can continue our relationship with the Select Subcommittee and in other areas around the Capitol. Thank you so much.
Thank you. He'll probably be moving around even faster. I will not challenge him to a race. I'm not quite where he is yet, but working to get there. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.